There are moments in a person's life that arrive quietly, a folded note, a casual glance, and leave wounds that take years to name. This is one of those stories. The morning she returned felt heavier than most. The car moved slowly through familiar streets, each turn carrying the weight of something unfinished. When it finally stopped at the iron gate of the villa, he took a long breath before walking through. Inside, the woman seated across the room was someone the world had spent 3 years admiring. Foreign press had called her brilliant, a rare mind. To him, she was simply the person his family had invited back, like a debt being called in. The conversation at the table was careful and measured, the kind adults have when they want things to appear natural but aren't. He sat quietly, watching the space between them and the distance his mother couldn't see. He had not yet found the words, and she, across the room with her sharp, peach blossom eyes and her composed expression, looked at him the way one looks at something already understood. She wasn't cruel. She was simply honest, and honesty sometimes is its own kind of cruelty. In the circles they both moved through, the game of power was familiar. Old families, new alliances, the invisible math of survival. The Pei family was fading, the Liu family was thriving, and somehow he had become the bridge between the two. His father steered every conversation toward her, toward opportunity, toward the future. He watched it happen the way a person watches water rise, slowly, then all at once. She heard it too. The polite dismissal in her voice when she spoke to him was not anger, it was something worse, indifference. Dinner ended the way these arrangements always do, with pleasantries, with smiles that said nothing, with the sound of chopsticks being set down on porcelain. She rose first, said her goodbyes, and left before the silence could settle into anything real. He was asked to walk her out. She moved quickly, her heels sharp against the stone path. He rushed to keep pace and then stumbled, and for one startled second, his head collided with the side of her neck. He apologized. She said nothing. She just kept walking. He stood there, watching her go, feeling as though something had been quietly removed from him. He already knew what was being asked of him. The family was in trouble. The company was bleeding. And she, brilliant, untouchable, powerful, was the only lifeline his parents could see. His happiness was not part of the equation. He said yes, not because he believed it, but because the weight of the people behind him was too heavy to carry without bending. He told himself it was a practical decision. He told himself he was ready. That night, among old friends and familiar noise, her name came up the way it always did, casually, inevitably. Someone asked how long she was staying. Someone else laughed and said she had already gone to dinner with his family. She had heard this too. She poured herself a glass without changing her expression and said nothing. Later that night, a doorbell. She stood at the door with the particular stillness of someone who had made a decision and would not be talked out of it. He had barely said her name before she stepped inside, and the door closed behind her. What followed was not tender. It was desperate. The kind of closeness that comes not from love, but from everything love refuses to be when it's afraid. She held his wrists. He couldn't find his footing, and somewhere in the middle of all of it, she pulled back. She was drunk. He could tell, but her eyes were clear enough to find his. She offered him a trade, one night, and she would save everything his family had built. He stood there, listening to words that should have felt transactional, but landed somewhere deeper. After a long silence, he said yes. By morning, a stranger was at the door, an assistant, efficient, polite, carrying instructions from her like items on a list. The word he used was simple. Marriage, not a question, a statement, a plan already in motion. And just like that, the thing that should have taken years was settled in hours. She sat in the back seat looking at her phone. He sat beside her, keeping a careful distance, watching the city move past the window, wondering how two people could share a car and still be so entirely alone. He had liked her for years. That was the honest truth no one had ever asked him to say out loud. He had followed her movements quietly, a bottle of water here, a seat near the stage there, small offerings she never acknowledged. Their closeness had always existed only on his side. There had been a birthday, a party he had planned to use as the moment he finally said the words. He had rehearsed it. His friend had kept watch by the door. When the room went dark and she appeared, he had stepped forward, heart enormous, voice steady. He said he liked her. He asked if she'd be with him. The room held its breath. He looked directly at her, her double-lidded eyes, her quiet composure, and waited. She said she was sorry. She said she didn't feel the same. The words were few. The silence after them was immense. He did not step back inside that room. Not that night. Months passed. Then years. She went abroad. He entered the entertainment world. Each of them built something of their own in the absence of the other. And now she had issued a new instruction. Move in. Start tomorrow. The villa was exactly as he had imagined. Familiar somehow, though he had never lived there. From now on, she said, her terms were simple. Phone on at all hours. No other women. Her rules weren't cruel. They were just final. He had the sense of a transaction fully completed, papers signed, the ink already dry. She added one more thing as she stepped onto the stairs, almost an afterthought. She didn't intend to interfere with his private life, and she expected the same courtesy in return. He watched her go up without looking back. Alone in the large, quiet house, he tried to decide what to feel. His father called. His voice was careful, asking questions without asking them directly. He answered in the same careful way. Everything was fine. She was treating him well. His father sounded relieved. He almost said more, almost asked something about the company, about whether any of this was worth it. But he swallowed it. He said goodbye. He set down the phone. The company was steadying. She had managed it. Pulled it back from the edge through something that looked, from the outside, like effortless competence. His father said to thank her. He considered how one thanks someone for saving everything while asking for nothing in return. He decided to cook. It was a small decision, but it felt like the only honest one he could make. He sent a message that afternoon, simple and tentative. Are you coming home tonight? He waited, watched the little dots appear on the screen. Her reply was unexpected. She would be back by 8. He cooked with the focus of someone trying to say something they don't know how to say with words. When she finally walked through the door, earlier than expected, she looked at the table as though she hadn't anticipated it. She picked up a plum. She looked at him. He nodded. She told him to wash his hands. It was the closest thing to warmth he had heard from her in weeks. He brought the last dish out and watched, quietly hopeful, as she tasted something he had made. Her face shifted, just slightly. Then she said it was good. 4 words. He felt something loosen in his chest that he hadn't known he'd been holding tight. He ladled soup. She told him not to thank her. They were each doing what the arrangement required. But then she paused, and something in her voice changed. She pointed out that he hadn't thanked her for the meal. He had. She corrected him. He corrected himself. For a moment they almost laughed. One morning, a message changed everything. An audition, a role, the kind of opportunity that doesn't come easily in this industry. She found out, dressed without being asked, and told him simply. She would take him there herself. What he didn't know was what happened in the car after she dropped him off. She made a call. Her voice was measured, her authority unmistakable. By the time he walked into that audition, decisions had already been made on his behalf. Decisions she had no obligation to make, and made anyway. The director had been given clear guidance. Whether he understood it fully or not, the message had been received. This person mattered. The details were sorted in the background, quietly, the way she handled everything, without announcement, without asking for credit. There were complications, another investor, a name with its own gravity. She said exactly what she needed to say and nothing more. The line went quiet. The matter was handled. He got the role. He didn't know how any of it had happened. His manager told him simply, the part was his, contract signed, filming in 3 days. He stood there trying to make sense of the speed of it. The only thing that occurred to him was that she must have done something, and that thought, for reasons he couldn't entirely explain, made him feel both grateful and unsettled. He came home that evening to find her already there. She was on the sofa, eyes closed, the day's exhaustion written quietly across her features. He sat beside her. He reached out and pressed his hands gently against her temples. She seemed to relax slightly. He watched her and thought about how rarely she allowed anyone this close. He told her about the filming, 3 months away. He told her about the actress who had just returned, the one they'd both grown up around, the one the world had missed. She opened her eyes. The mention of that name did something to her he couldn't read. What followed was sudden and difficult to explain. One moment he was speaking and the next she had pulled him in, close, urgent, as if she needed to say something she didn't have the language for. He didn't resist, he didn't fully understand, but something in that moment felt like more than what either of them would have admitted to calling it. Then, just as abruptly, she stopped. She moved away. She lay on the sofa with her back to him, her shoulders rising and falling too steadily to be asleep. He could see her hands, clenched. He waited. She didn't move. The distance between them, which had briefly closed, opened again like a door swinging wide. He dressed slowly. His body ached in ways that weren't entirely physical. He went up the stairs carefully, one step at a time, and stood in the bathroom mirror for a long moment. He had spent so many years telling himself things that weren't true about what she felt. Maybe it was time to stop. 3 days later, filming began. He sent her one message before he left. She didn't reply. A week passed, then another. He kept the phone close. He kept checking. The chat history was a one-sided thing, his words arranged in a column going unanswered. He told himself it was nothing. He almost believed it. She, on the other side of the world, was moving through boardrooms and hotel corridors. She told herself she was busy. She told herself the silence was appropriate, professional, mutual. And then one evening, alone in a London hotel room, she put on an old film she had seen before and found herself unable to name the feeling sitting in her chest. She booked a flight back the next morning. She didn't tell anyone why. She landed, held a meeting that ran until 9 at night, and then drove without direction through the city, until the car stopped somewhere she recognized. The lights of the house were off. He hadn't come back from filming yet. She let herself in. She sat on the sofa. The house was quiet in the specific way that happens when someone is missing from a space. She had barely settled when she heard the door. He stood in the entrance, and they looked at each other across the room. Both startled, neither willing to show it. He went to the kitchen without saying much. He boiled noodles. He asked if she was hungry. She said yes, quietly, a word that cost her something. He brought 2 bowls and set them down. She ate everything. He watched, without making a production of it, and felt something ordinary and warm move through him. After, she went to a locked room that no one else used. She sat at the desk. She pulled open a drawer that held boxes she never opened in front of anyone. Small, wrapped, accumulated over time. She looked at them for a while, then she closed the drawer. She didn't tell anyone what was inside. The engagement banquet was held at noon in a hotel ballroom full of old money and careful smiles. He arrived beside her, dressed for the occasion, aware that he represented not just himself, but everything the Liu family had allowed to attach itself to their name. She presented their gift without ceremony. He had chosen couple necklaces, personal, specific. She acknowledged this without comment. Around them, the room moved and murmured. Someone raised a glass. Someone made a remark about resources and favors, wrapped inside congratulations. She heard the subtext. She responded in kind, direct, and unhurried. No one pushed further. Later, the ceremony. Rings exchanged. A kiss beneath chandeliers. The room applauded. He sat on a sofa while she was surrounded by people who needed things from her. He accepted a glass of fruit wine and listened, half present, to conversations happening nearby. He heard what they were saying about him, about why there hadn't been a wedding, about what the Pei family needed and what the Liu family had agreed to give. The words were not especially loud, but they found him anyway. He held his bag and stared at the middle distance and reminded himself that he already knew all of this. Knowing didn't make it smaller. The voices continued. He heard himself described as an accessory, decorative, useful, temporary. He had no illusion that she loved him. He had told himself he only wanted peace. But sitting in that room, hearing himself reduced so cleanly, he understood that peace and dignity were not always the same thing. She found him eventually. She sat beside him. She had set aside a slice of cake in the flavor she remembered he liked from years ago, from a version of them that no longer existed in any formal way. He looked at her. She asked if he was uncomfortable. He said no. He tried to mean it. He went upstairs to rest. He lay on the bed in the quiet room and listened to the muffled sounds of the party continuing below. He did not mean to fall asleep, but exhaustion made the decision for him. When he woke, the sky had gone dark. His phone had missed 13 calls, all from her. He called back. Her voice was sharp with something that sounded like anger but moved like fear. He explained. He had been asleep, the phone on silent. He was sorry. She told him not to run. He said he wasn't running. He sat on the edge of the bed and waited. She arrived quickly. Then someone else arrived first. The woman who had set aside the cake, who had come to check if he was resting, who reached for his hand just as the door opened behind her. She stood in the doorway. Her voice, when it came, was winter cold and absolutely certain. She looked at him and said she had clearly underestimated him. He tried to speak. She didn't give him the space. She turned and left without slamming the door, which somehow felt worse. The controlled exit. The door closed behind her like a verdict. He stood in the room, alone again, trying to understand what had just been broken and whether it had always been fragile. She drove fast that night. The city moved past the windows without meaning. She thought about what she had seen. She knew what it wasn't. She almost didn't care what it was. What stayed with her was the feeling, the lurch in her chest when she had looked through that door. And the fact that she hadn't expected to feel it at all. Weeks passed. Then a chance encounter. A bar. Late. A young woman sitting a few seats away. She wore no particular expression. She poured drinks. She said little. At some point, Ruyan noticed her and said something small, and the girl answered carefully, the way people do when they're not sure what kind of conversation they're in. She was a film student, first year. She had only come for a shift. Ruyan watched her pour and asked where she studied. The film academy, the same place he had trained. Something flickered across her face, though she kept it still. She told the girl to wash her face. The girl didn't understand but went anyway, and when she came back, Ruyan was filling her glass. They sat together for a while. The girl, Lily, poured carefully and said almost nothing. She had been trained to listen more than speak in rooms like this. Ruyan drank steadily and eventually, without announcement, fell asleep on the sofa. Lily stayed close, uncertain what to do. In the drift between waking and sleep, a name rose to the surface. Quiet, almost inaudible, but there, the two syllables of someone the world had stopped seeing in Ruyan's face. Lily leaned in, listening. The name came again. Then an assistant arrived, efficient and practiced, to take her home. She refused the cash the assistant tried to give her. He seemed surprised. She told him she hadn't done it for payment. The car drove. Ruyan, in the back seat, said something the assistant hadn't expected. Take her home. Not the office, not anywhere else, home. Inside the house, she moved carefully, as though afraid to disturb the quiet that lived there. She went upstairs. She sat on the edge of the bed. She lit a cigarette. Then she reached into the bedside table and took out a photograph. The photograph was old. A birthday. Two young people. One of them was smiling broadly, that particular kind of happiness that doesn't know it's being recorded. She looked at it for a long time. Then she put it away. Then she sat in the dark and let herself feel something she rarely named. He had found his way into her life gradually, in the way that children do. Insistently, cheerfully, without invitation. A ball, a summer, a grandmother's yard. She had not welcomed him exactly, but she had not turned him away. And somewhere in that ambiguity, something had settled into permanence. High school changed things. He transferred to her school with his short dark hair and his easy smile, and she felt something she immediately chose not to examine. She had told herself it was irritation. That was easier. What she didn't know then, what she learned later, coldly, all at once, was that his presence was not accidental. It had been arranged. The Pei family had engineered it. Every moment of closeness had been calculated toward an outcome. And then came the evening she had arrived at the Pei villa and seen him with someone else, someone he should not have been with if any of it had been real. She left without a scene. She left without explanation. She simply left, and for 3 years she stayed gone. Now, years later, she sat in her childhood home and listened to her parents speak carefully around the subject of the marriage. They had accepted the situation. They had decided not to interfere. But they asked only one thing. Bring him home for dinner, eventually. Let the family see. She said she would consider it. She said this in the tone she reserved for things she had no intention of revisiting immediately. The days that followed were quiet, smooth, almost, until the message came from the crew asking her to return to the set. She had taken 3 days off and now had to go back. On set, nothing went smoothly. She couldn't find the stillness the role required. A scene that should have taken 2 takes stretched into 10. The director called her aside, gently, and told her the script had changed. The role she'd been building was being reshaped. A male lead added. Someone else's investment, someone else's choice. She was not consulted. She stood in the dressing room and thought about the word investor. She thought about who had rearranged her role without her knowledge. She already half knew, but she didn't let the answer rise all the way to the surface. A colleague asked if she was upset about someone. She didn't answer. She walked down the hall and found the door to her dressing room already occupied. A name she knew, the kind of name that carries weight in certain rooms, was using the space. She knocked anyway. She stated her name. She was told to wait. When she entered, she saw a figure on the sofa, facing away. White shirt. Shoulders she would recognize without being able to explain how. The realization came in stages, first as familiarity, then as certainty, then as the particular specific hurt of someone sitting in a room they do not belong in, while someone else adjusts the furniture of your life. He turned. He looked at her with an expression she had only seen a few times, the careful neutrality of a person deciding how to be in a difficult moment. She gathered her clothes. She left without speaking. In the hallway, a colleague asked what was wrong. She said nothing and kept walking. That evening she lay on her bed in the rented house and let the questions come. What were they to each other in this project? Why was he here? Why had the role changed? And underneath all of that, the oldest question, had any of it, any piece of it, ever been real? She remembered the first notification she had ever received about a role. She had been so excited she went directly to find him. He had opened the door with wet hair, barely dressed, and she had felt something then that she had never permitted herself to name. She had made him put on clothes. He had poured her warm milk. They had sat together watching nothing in particular, and it had felt like the safest thing. He had asked if she really wanted to be a star. She had said yes without hesitation. He had smiled that particular smile that suggested he already knew the answer. She thought now about how easy it had been then, how uncomplicated. She thought about how much careful distance it had taken to arrive at this. A party. The crew gathered in a cabin somewhere between celebration and obligation. He arrived late and saw her immediately. Across the room, glass in hand, effortlessly present. He told himself not to look too long. Someone raised a toast. Someone else mentioned his name and the glass in his hand, and then the director made a suggestion, a joke dressed as a dare, and suddenly there was a glass in front of him and expectation in the room. She was watching him from a few seats away. He could feel it. He sat beside her and breathed the same air and pretended that was nothing. Someone else occupied her attention. She gave them a fraction of herself. He gave the room what it asked for. He drank. He drank more. Around them, the cabin warmed with noise. Someone sang. The song was good, directed entirely at her, and she let it land without receiving it. He watched this and felt something that he did not name. She finally spoke, directly, simply, and without softening. She said the singing was slow. She said the perfume was overwhelming. She said this in the tone she reserved for things she meant completely. The room went quiet. Nobody moved. Then someone tried to recover the mood, and the night continued, and no one brought it up again. He was surprised. He had not expected her to speak like that. Not in front of everyone, not about something so direct. He looked at his hands. He refilled his glass. He tried to understand what she was doing and whether any of it was for him. The rest of the night moved in and out of focus. More glasses appeared. He accepted them. The room tilted gently at the edges. She watched without comment as he drank what was meant for her, glass by glass, quietly replacing himself as her shield without being asked to. He was flushed and unsteady by the end. A colleague stood up to drink in his place. She said nothing to stop it but watched. And there, in that watching, was something he almost caught the edge of before it disappeared again. He knocked a glass. He ran outside. He spent some time by himself against the cold air, and when he came back in, no one mentioned it. The nausea passed slowly. Alone in the corridor, far from the music, he thought about an earlier version of himself. Younger, curious about what wine tasted like, sneaking a glass while she was distracted. She had come back and found him red-faced and overwhelmed, and she had been so matter-of-fact about it, so quietly present, that he had never forgotten it. A colleague came and sat beside him on the bathroom floor, patient and steady. He kept saying he was fine. The colleague kept not leaving. After a while they went back in. He could feel her eyes on him. He didn't look up. She spoke to him then, low, close, barely audible above the room. She said he had done well. He had held his expression. He didn't know what to do with small kindnesses from her, so he filed it away somewhere careful and went on. More wine appeared. The director made another production of it. He raised the bottle. He looked at her across the table. She said nothing. A colleague offered to drink in his place again. She declined it, gently, precisely, and put the bottle in front of him herself. The room understood. It had been decided. He drank it, all of it. He looked at her when he set the empty bottle down. She looked back, and in that look, barely a second, unnarrated, shared, something passed between them that the room could not see. He barely made it home. A colleague held him upright down the corridor. He didn't remember lying down. What he did remember, in the way you remember things you don't look at directly, was a cold cloth on his face and someone sitting quietly nearby in the dark. A knock at the door. The director stood in the hallway with something wrapped in a bag. He handed it to the colleague without explanation. Medicine for the alcohol. Then leaned against the wall outside and made a phone call. He said the delivery had been made. On the other end, silence. Then the line went dead. Morning. His throat was ruined. He mouthed words at his colleague who had spent the night in the chair by the door. He could not speak above a whisper. He ate the porridge that appeared in front of him and was grateful for every plain, uncomplicated spoonful. Outside, in the parking lot, she was taking a call. Her voice was measured, efficient. She gave instructions. She listened. She didn't explain her decisions to the people who carried them out. She rarely did. What she didn't say, what she never said, was that she had been watching the situation on set more closely than anyone knew. When she walked onto the set and saw him laughing with a colleague, easy, warm, the kind of laugh that doesn't know it's being observed. Something moved through her quickly and without her permission. She looked away. She told herself it was nothing. She had a meeting to run. Someone nearby tried to read the situation. An assistant nudged a third party. Go say hello. Bring a peace offering. Look contrite. The young man hesitated. He held the bag she had sent. He walked over slowly, rehearsing something he hadn't been asked to say. She asked about the schedule without looking up. Someone mentioned his name without realizing what it would do to the air in the room. She set down her cup. She asked whose scene it was, and in the answer, easy and informative, meaning nothing to the person giving it, she heard something she hadn't expected. She looked up. Her voice was even but absolute. 3 words, spoken quietly, that rearranged the room. He deserves it. The young man who had said otherwise went still. She had not raised her voice. She had not made a scene. And yet everyone in earshot understood immediately that the matter was finished. The young man apologized. She didn't acknowledge it. She told him to go. He went. An assistant nearby smiled quietly and said nothing. Some things didn't need commentary. Later he found out what had happened. A colleague told him, piecing together the version that had reached her. He stood and listened and didn't say anything for a while. The version he ended up with wasn't entirely accurate, but even the version he received was enough to make him go still in the middle of everything else. There was a young woman on the crew, Lily again, different context, different day, who had constructed her own understanding of the situation. She had watched from a distance and drawn the conclusions that made the most sense from where she stood, that Ryan was protective of him because she cared for him. She wasn't wrong, exactly, but she also didn't know the full map of it. 3 years earlier, Ryan had been at a party she didn't particularly want to attend. She had been sitting near the window when she noticed a young man across the room, 18 or 19, new to the industry, moving the way people do when they're trying to look like they belong. She had thought, this one won't last. Then she had looked again. She had recognized him. It had taken her a moment to locate the recognition. Then it arrived. His face, changed and shaped by years, but unmistakably the same person. She had filed it away. She had not spoken to him that night, and then months later he appeared in her orbit again, and everything that followed had not, despite what it looked like, been coincidence. On set, a scene was being filmed. A scene that required closeness, sustained eye contact, the kind of physical presence that can't be faked without surrendering something. The director was not satisfied. He asked for it again. Then again. He asked for more. He closed his eyes. He reached for something that felt real enough to use. He thought of a night from years ago, the only night he had allowed himself something close to honest. Her, in the car, his lips against her ear, her small finger curling into his hand. He had pretended to be drunker than he was. She had been careful with him anyway. The director called cut and said it was the best take yet. He opened his eyes and came back to the present. The person in front of him was not her, but the feeling had been real. He thanked the director. He said he'd try to maintain it. He smiled and meant nothing by it. He walked back to the rental house alone. The path was short. He reached the door, turned the key, and before he could step inside, something pushed him forward and he fell into the room. The lights were off. The door swung shut. A figure moved toward him in the dark. He called her name. She didn't stop. He raised his hand. The sound was sharp and unmistakable in the dark room. She went still. A long silence. Then her voice, low, steady, and very dangerous. You hit me. He stood there breathing hard, feeling the regret already forming beneath the adrenaline. He knew he had made a mistake. He also knew he did not regret making it. She said something that felt like an exit disguised as an insult. She laughed, a sound with nothing warm in it, and left. The door closed. He sat in the dark for a long time and tried to find an angle from which what had just happened made sense. She walked out into the lamplit hallway. She leaned against the wall. Her hand rose slowly to her face. She touched the place where his palm had landed. 5 clean marks, visible even in the low light. She stood there with something that, if she had named it honestly, might have been called shame. Not at the marks, but at the sequence of choices that had led her here. She called her assistant. She said to book a flight back to the city that evening. No explanation, just the instruction, and then the phone going back into her pocket. A friend picked up the pieces of the night she could reach. Cards, drinks, company. She watched Ruyan across the table, absent even when present, winning and then not caring that she'd won. Something was being swallowed repeatedly, carefully, and without acknowledgement. Eventually the friend gave voice to what the room was feeling. She said, "You can talk about it, or you can keep losing badly at cards, but one of them has to stop." Ruyan looked at her. Then she looked at the table. Then she said nothing and poured another drink. Later, alone with the friend she trusted most, the subject was finally raised. The friend said what she'd seen, what she'd wondered, whether the thing that had happened at the hotel was as misunderstood as it appeared. Ruyan listened without expression. Then she asked a question that answered itself. "What does it matter now?" The friend said, "You could have him if you wanted." Ruyan looked at her directly for the first time. She said, "I could have had him." The difference in tense was not lost on either of them. They sat together in the particular quiet of two people who understand exactly what is being left unsaid. She stood and left. The friend watched her go and didn't try to stop her. Outside, the night was cold and still. She stood on the roadside for a long moment. And then, from behind her, a quiet voice said something she hadn't expected to hear. She turned. The young man from the bar, Lily again, waiting for a bus she hadn't caught yet, looked at her with the cautious recognition of someone who doesn't want to intrude, but also cannot simply walk away. Ruyan looked at him for a moment, placing him. Then she said, "You." He nodded. She offered him a ride. He hesitated. Then he opened the back door and got in. On the drive, he sat quietly, looking at his hands, aware of the weight of sitting in her car, in her orbit, in a moment that should not have been his. The car stopped. He thanked her. She watched the cinema entrance swallow him before she drove away. She sat in the idling car and looked at the cinema for a while. She had been here before, not with him, with someone else, years ago, in a different version of the same hope. She let herself feel this briefly, and then pulled back into traffic. The city moved around her, indifferent and continuous. The project wrapped. The last day had the particular lightness of exhaustion becoming relief. A long table in a local restaurant, filled with people who had spent months learning each other's rhythms. The director stood and toasted with the sincerity of someone who had genuinely cared. People laughed. Wine was poured. He sat in the middle of it, aware of everything and responsible to no one for a moment. He rubbed his eyes. He looked around the room. He had done this. He had made something. And somewhere in the making of it, without being able to mark the exact moment, he had grown. Someone asked him about the investor, about her. He looked at them for a second before answering. The careful hesitation of someone who has decided how much of the truth to give. He said simply, "We are what we are." That was enough. He flew back. He walked into the house. The lights were on. She wasn't there. He looked at the rooms, unchanged, ordered, the specific tidiness of a space maintained by someone who expects to return. He carried his luggage upstairs and opened the wardrobe. Beside his things, a row of clothes he didn't recognize, new, unworn, sized for him, exactly for him. He stood very still. He checked the tags. He looked at the styles. He touched the fabric. His hands were shaking slightly. He didn't say it out loud, but the thought arrived completely. She bought these for him, while he was gone, without saying anything. He sat on the bed with the wardrobe still open. He couldn't make himself move. The phone rang. His mother. He answered. She asked how things were going. She asked if there had been any news. any movement towards something more permanent. He gave her the usual, careful nothing. She pressed, gently but persistently, the way mothers do. She said, "If there's a child, that changes things." He listened to this without responding. He had heard it before, from different mouths, in different framings. He had always found it distasteful. He sat on the bed after the call ended and looked at the wardrobe again, and then at the door, and tried to feel less like an arrangement. He showered, he ate noodles, he sat on the sofa with the television off, and the quiet of the house around him. And then outside, the sound of an engine. Footsteps. The door opened, and a friend walked in supporting her weight, Ruyon, heavier with drink than she had been in a long time. They helped her upstairs together, shoes off, blanket pulled, the small practical kindnesses of people who know each other well. The friend stayed for a moment, and then spoke, honest and without decoration. "This has been going on for weeks. She drinks and then cancels flights. She was going to come back. Over and over she was going to come back." The friend left. He sat beside her and held her hand and asked a question she couldn't hear. He thought about what he'd been told, the cancelled flights, the repeated drinking, the going and not going. He thought about the wardrobe full of clothes she hadn't mentioned. He thought about how much quieter things become when someone stops pretending they don't care. So she stirred. He brought her something to drink. She looked at him, in the particular unfocused way of someone whose defenses have come partially offline. And something in her expression was different from anything he had seen before. Softer. Unguarded. She reached for his hand. She pulled him close. He went, cautiously, then completely. What followed was tender and slow, the kind of closeness that doesn't ask anything of tomorrow. He lay beside her and listened to her breathe. And then, in the space just before sleep took her, she said something into his neck. Quiet, worn down to honesty by everything the night had cost her. She said his name. Then she said, "Why won't you like me?" Morning. An alarm. He woke in the grey light and looked at the other side of the bed. She was asleep. He watched her for a moment. Still, unguarded, looking the way she never allowed herself to look when she knew he was watching. Then his phone showed a message notification. His mother had sent something. Instructions, medicine, a suggestion that they try for a child soon, before the opportunity passed. He read it. He read it again. Something cold moved through him. He put the phone face down and looked at the ceiling for a long time. She woke up then. She saw his face. She asked what he was reading. He said nothing. She asked again. The silence that followed was its own kind of confession. She reached the conclusion, the same conclusion anyone would reach, having woken next to someone who won't speak. She got out of bed and dressed quickly. She walked out without looking at him. He came downstairs to find breakfast already on the table. She was seated, eating, as if nothing had happened. She called him over with her voice and his name, and did not look up. He sat across from her. He picked up his spoon. She slid a small box toward him without comment. He looked at it. Then he looked at her. His chest ached. He couldn't eat. He could feel her across the table. Deliberate, composed, performing a normalcy she did not feel. He thought about what she had said in the dark last night. He thought about the medicine box. He thought about whether two things that contradicted each other could both be true at the same time. She finished her meal. She set down her chopsticks. She said simply, "It's better," meaning the food, meaning something else. He watched her face and searched for what was actually being said. She met his eyes briefly, then looked away. He felt in that moment that they were both holding the same impossible thing, too fragile to name, too heavy to set down. He didn't know what she was thinking. He rarely did. That had always been the hardest part, not the distance, not the arrangement, not the performances required in public. But this, sitting across from her at a table and having no way of knowing whether the warmth he occasionally sensed was real or simply the reflection of his own longing. Time passed. He slept. He woke in the early evening to a ringing phone. A voice he hadn't heard in years. Warm, immediate, familiar. A friend who had been abroad for as long as he could remember. She was back. She was in the city. She was calling from somewhere loud and happy, and just the sound of her made something in him relax that had been tight for a long time. He worried she'd leave again quickly. She said maybe. She said let's not think about that yet. He laughed. A real one. He couldn't remember the last time. They met at a bar. She had brought good wine and the particular ease of someone who has lived in enough places to stop needing things to be complicated. She poured. He drank. They talked around the things they meant for a while before settling into something more honest. She raised the subject of the two people who had just gotten engaged. The pair everyone agreed were perfect for each other. He said he was glad for them. She said she wasn't sure they were as matched as people thought. He was surprised. She said, sometimes being too similar means neither person moves. He considered this. He hadn't thought about it that way before. She said the two people she actually thought belonged together were him and Ryan. He went quiet. She said she'd always thought so. Something about the way they existed near each other, the way the air changed. He stared at his glass. He said she was wrong. He said it too quickly to be convincing. She told him what she had seen over the years, the times Ryan had shown up without being asked, the fever in the middle of the night, and a doorbell 20 minutes later, wet from rain, holding strawberries. He said that was just how she was. She said, no, it wasn't. He had never seen Ryan do that for anyone else. He said some things were more complicated than they looked. She accepted this. She changed the subject. She refilled his glass and let the evening go where evenings go when two old friends decide that one conversation is enough for now. And then, from across the bar, a sound. Sharp, ugly, the kind that silences a room. They both looked up. A man was standing over a young waitress, his voice raised, a broken bottle in his hand, and the woman, young, trembling, bleeding, stood exactly where she had been standing, unable to move. A man's anger was visible, his hands reaching toward the waitress, but he had clearly underestimated who stood nearby. Ryan moved without hesitation. The man hit the floor, and the waitress stood shaken, still catching her breath. Pei crossed the room and asked quietly, "Are you all right? Do you need a hospital?" The waitress declined. "It would cost too much," she said. Then she looked up and recognized the face standing before her. Ryan knelt beside the man, checked him, then stood. He turned to the waitress, her forehead still bleeding, and insisted on driving her to the pharmacy himself. Inside, the attendant spotted the wound immediately. The right medicine was pulled from the shelf without a word. 120 yuan. The waitress counted out the cash carefully. Pei stepped forward. The wound needed proper dressing, she said, or it would scar. She pointed to a chair and asked her to sit. Then she opened the alcohol, dipped the cotton, and warned her, "This will sting." The girl barely flinched. She sat through it quietly, patiently, while Pei worked. When it was done, she folded the remaining gauze back into the box and looked up. "Thank you," she said softly. Ryan nodded. No need. Neither of them could stand watching someone be treated that way. Pei asked her name. "Lena," she said. "And yours?" "Ryan." "Pei." "Lena. Would today's trouble affect your work?" That man had a temper and a grudge. He wouldn't simply walk away. But Lena shook her head calmly. She wasn't going back to that job anyway. There were still things to be done. School for one. The realization surprised them both. She looked so young, and yet she was already doing both. She worked and studied at the same time, she explained. Not because it was easy, because she had no choice. A younger brother, high school fees. Money didn't appear on its own. Pei asked which school. The film academy, Lena said. The same one. A coincidence that made Ryan smile. Fate had a quiet sense of humor. They offered her a ride back, and she accepted. On the way, memories surfaced. A wonton restaurant the owner used to run. Stories told with the kind of warmth that lingered long after. The city outside the window moved steadily past. 20 minutes later they reached the cinema. Lena thanked them both and stepped out into the evening, disappearing toward the entrance. Pei sat for a moment, It had been a long time since she'd come back here. The city didn't wait. Buildings rose where open spaces used to be. A few days could change the shape of a place. Pei laughed softly. Ryan was right. She drove to Ryan's apartment. They would stay the night. She changed into borrowed pajamas and checked her phone. A message sent. A reply came back. Short, simple. Ruyan wasn't coming home tonight. Pei set down the phone, set her alarm, and let the silence settle. They hadn't slept under the same roof like this in a long time. It brought back an older feeling, the kind you forget existed until it returns. Late nights at Ruyan's house, lying in her bedroom until morning came without warning. Ruyan had always pretended to be annoyed, but she let them stay anyway. The memory of it felt almost unreal now. Those years, that ease. Pei stared at the light above and turned to Ryan. She asked, "When did you first know that Ruyan cared for me?" Ryan said, "Didn't you notice she was always watching you?" Pei wasn't sure. What was the difference? Ryan explained it carefully. Ruyan never let anyone into her room, not once. But for Pei, she made room. She tolerated the snacks, the noise, the chaos. On Pei's birthday, she even agreed to karaoke. Ruyan had turned green when Pei grabbed her and refused to let go, insisting they sing together. Anya and Ryan had been certain she would throw them out, but she didn't. And then, for the first time, Ruyan sang. Ryan went quiet at the memory. The sound of it had stunned the room. Pei opened her mouth. She couldn't remember it. The next day it was gone, buried under embarrassment and noise. "What a pity," Ryan said quietly. Ruyan's singing voice was extraordinary. She had sung, "I like you." Ryan sighed. It might be the last time anyone ever heard it. The thought sat heavily between them. They talked until the words ran out, and Ryan drifted off. Pei lay listening to the rhythm of steady breathing. Sleep wouldn't come. She reached for her phone, turned the volume down low, pressed one earbud in. A love song played, the kind where every lyric arrives like something half-remembered. She fell asleep somewhere in the middle of it. 1 week later, a script arrived, longer than expected, sooner than she'd hoped. The shoot was in the city this time. She could go home between days. She finished early, just past 7. Ruyan had been arriving before sunrise and leaving after dark. They moved through the same apartment like ships in different waters, rarely passing. Pei walked in to find her sitting with a laptop. She held up the bakery box and asked, "Cake?" Ruyan knew Pei didn't like sweets. She asked only out of habit. But Pei's eyes didn't move from the strawberry cake. So Ruyan cut the largest piece and set it aside, leaving herself almost nothing. She watched Pei eat, quiet, focused on her screen. She didn't say a word, couldn't. Later that evening, Ruyan moved first, reaching, turning, pulling her gently close on the sofa. "What are you doing?" Pei asked. "What do you think?" Ruyan replied. And then, nothing needed to be said. The night found its own language. When morning came, Pei had slept past 10. There are small moments that strip a person of all pretense. A public bathroom, no phone, no paper. A voice asking, "Is anyone out there? Can you pass some through the door?" A pause. Then a quiet hand slid a pack of tissues under. Sometimes it is the smallest kindness that stays longest. She was only a small role in this production, but the way she carried herself said otherwise. Every scene landed with intention. Pei had watched her on set and felt something she recognized. The particular discipline of someone building something from nothing. She told her so. Persistence finds its way eventually. Lena smiled. She knew success was not a gift. This small role had required her to fight for it many times over. Pei called her name after the shoot. "Lena, are you heading back to school now?" She nodded. Pei offered to drop her off. "Just in time," she said. No need to refuse. Lena accepted. Ruyan's car was waiting nearby. She climbed in because it was the practical choice. The car was close, but when Lena saw the vehicle, a sleek black car, something shifted in her expression. She recovered quickly, but Pei had not quite noticed. On the drive, Lena grew quiet. At the school gate, she came back to herself, thanked Pei, stepped out. Inside, Pei parked and sat with her thoughts. Ruyan's presence was too loud for a crowded parking lot. Tomorrow, she'd take her own car. She walked back toward the lobby. Ruyan was on the sofa, cigarette in hand, eyes fixed ahead. He looked at her. She started to explain. He cut her off. "Go cook. I'm hungry." She handed back the key. Dinner was green pepper pork and mushroom soup. Simple, fast, honest. He didn't ask what it was. He just ate. He ate quickly, then set down his bowl before it was empty and walked away. Pei made a note to buy more vegetables tomorrow. When she passed the bedroom later, he was already asleep. She approached slowly. He opened his eyes. She reached for the blanket. He caught her wrist, turned, and pulled her gently close. "Wait," she started. He looked at her, then a flush, and then he got up and walked to the bathroom, the sound of running water. The crew had arrived. The director stood near the entrance already speaking. On set, Ruyan leaned against a willow tree. White shirt, still figure, the morning light finding the angles of his face. The people around him forgot their lines. Pei turned and saw him. A small, surprised breath. "Why are you here?" he answered simply. "When do you finish?" 10 o'clock, she said. He nodded. "I'll wait." Lena had taken the opportunity to slip away to the bathroom. She stood at the sink when voices drifted in from the next stall, 2 crew members speaking without caution. They were talking about Ruyan, about connections, about who he was. Then a director shouted a name and the voices stopped cold. One of them said it first. "That's Ruyan." The other couldn't believe it. How could someone like that be here, on a film set, with Pei, without announcement? The men exchanged looks, disbelief wrapped in something more complicated. One spoke low. "How does Pei know Ruyan?" The implication hung in the air between them, unkind, careless. Lena stood still at the sink long after the voices faded. She dried her hands, pressed her back to the wall for a moment. Then she walked out. Back on set, she found her place. But her eyes moved, past the lights, past the cameras, to where Pei stood, and then beyond, to the figure that Pei's eyes always quietly found. Lena watched that for a moment, then looked away. A crew member appeared beside her, chattering about the stranger across the set. Had she seen that person? Beautiful, wasn't she? Lena said she'd heard. That's all. He leaned in closer. She's clearly someone important. The way people moved around her said everything. He sighed with theatrical longing. When will I ever meet someone like that? Lena looked at him sideways. Hope is a big word, she said. What do you mean? He asked. Lena answered without cruelty. Lose weight first. The advice landed. He straightened, decided. From today, a new life begins. No more delay. 10 women, maybe 5. Actually 10. Lena let the ambition stand without comment. She turned back to the set. The day continued. She couldn't explain it exactly. Why her eyes kept drifting toward Ruyan. But they did. Quietly, involuntarily. Ruyan moved through the set like someone who had mastered stillness. The director never called a halt. The scenes rolled and Pei played through them. Loss, restraint, the kind of grief that doesn't know its own name. A final scene approached. The group was meeting at the karaoke lounge. The message arrived. They'd already started. Pei changed her clothes and found Ruyan waiting outside, phone at his ear, leaning quietly against the wall. He glanced over. The others are singing already. Should we go? Pei thought about it. It had been too long since they'd all been in the same room. She nodded. Ruyan spoke into the phone. We're on our way. He moved toward the car first. Then a soft voice behind him. He turned. A young woman in a white t-shirt and short dress stood a step away. Lena, holding out something small, a lipstick, fallen without notice. Ruyan touched the corner of his mouth. Gone. He took it back and thanked her. And just as Lena was about to say something more, Pei's voice came from behind, calling her name. Their conversation arrived at the same moment. Pei introduced them quickly. Same crew. Ruyan listened without comment. His phone rang again. He stepped aside. Lena said her goodbye and left. Afterward, Ruyan turned to Pei. Are you close with her? Pei tilted her head. Since when did Ruyan ask about her friendships? I'm just asking, he said. She didn't press further. On the drive over, he stopped for a bottle of red wine, the kind that made everyone's eyes go wide. The karaoke room was already chaos. Ryan's voice carried through the walls before the door opened. Anya was beside himself. Ruyan stepped through first, scanned the room with his usual calm. Ryan threw himself at Pei with open arms. Finally. Ruyan raised an eyebrow. Ryan froze mid-motion. He set her down carefully and turned to Ruyan with a smile that said he understood completely. The red wine was opened, glasses filled. The night began. Ryan pulled Pei aside while the music played. The question arrived quietly. So you still like him? Pei didn't answer right away. Actually, she said, yes, a little. The second word wouldn't come. Anya burst through the moment, microphone in hand. Come sing. What are you two doing? Ryan looked at Pei. One song. She refused. Ryan turned to Ruyan instead, a deliberate challenge. His vocal range, Ryan announced cheerfully, was somewhere between impossible and planetary. Ruyan picked up the microphone anyway. He chose something quiet, a ballad with room for stillness. Not perfect, but present. Ryan and Anya clapped. More, Ryan demanded. Pei passed the microphone over without argument. The wine had come around twice. Anya proposed a toast. This wine, she said, was extraordinary. It should be, Ruyan said. Ryan asked how much. 6 figures, he replied. Anya paused. Why didn't someone pour her juice instead? Ruyan looked at her. Habit, he said. Flat. Anya chose not to fight it. At the table, the conversation shifted. Someone mentioned graduation, the way distance made old rooms feel smaller. Ryan raised a glass to missing people. Ruyan drank quietly throughout. He had a habit, tapping his glass twice before every sip. Pei had watched it for years without ever mentioning it. It was still there, unchanged. The night moved softly through stories and pauses. When someone mentioned old names, Ruyan's smile arrived and left without being noticed. Almost. The party ended slowly. Ryan and Anya said their goodbyes first. Pei followed Ruyan out into the cool air. You drank, she said. I'll drive. He handed over the keys without argument. On the ride back, he leaned against the seat, eyes dim, half somewhere else. He looked like he was sleeping. He wasn't. He was turning over something Ryan had asked, whether she liked him. His heart had shaken at the question. He wanted to hear the answer. He was afraid of it. So the question stayed unanswered, and he decided, for now, that was fine. A fantasy without contradiction is still something to hold. He had left once. He had meant to forget. Distance and years and thousands of miles between them, and still, every road curved back. So he came home. Even without her heart, he could be near her. He could wait. But then an old love returned, and everything he'd quietly built began to shake. Pei spotted the supermarket from the window and pulled over. She thought he was asleep. She reached over. He opened his eyes immediately. She explained there was nothing at home. He blinked slowly and got out without a word. Inside, she pushed the cart. He walked a step behind. She reached for vegetables and turned to find snacks already sitting in the basket, quietly placed, no announcement made. She looked at him. He looked at the shelf. At the register, the total came to 514 yuan. Pei reached for her phone. Someone's camera found them and didn't look away. The cashier smiled at the couple in front of her. Sir, she said, you and your girlfriend are a perfect match. Ruyan turned to catch Pei's reaction. She had already walked out the door. He turned back to the cashier. Thank you, he said. He carried the bags after her. That sentence, small and accidental, stayed with him longer than he expected. Back home, Pei cooked. A new dish, one she'd never made for him before. She watched from the corner of her eye as he lifted his chopsticks, placed a piece in his mouth, and chewed. "Well?" she asked before she could stop herself. "Not bad," he said. She wanted to add more to his bowl immediately. He told her to wait. She'd already done it. The flavor hit. Hot, then rich, then something that stayed. He looked at the bowl. He didn't speak. She pretended not to notice. An invitation arrived that she hadn't expected. This was the first time he'd asked her to come to the Liu family home, to meet them, not as a guest, as something closer. The old house sat quietly within its gates, unchanged from the outside, but heavier with meaning now. Ruyan held her hand without warning as they approached. She nearly stopped walking. He pulled her forward. The housekeeper at the door recognized them and called inside. "Pei has arrived." His father appeared and set the tone immediately. Warm, direct, without ceremony. He placed a luxury watch on Pei's wrist before she could form a refusal. "Uncle, this is too much," she started. He cut her off. "If you recognize me as your elder, then accept it." She accepted. From upstairs, Ruyan and his mother descended. The table had been prepared, Mrs. Liu said quietly. "Don't go back tonight. It isn't safe." Ruyan thanked her in 2 words. The meal began. Pei sat across from a table of strangers who already treated her like family. She didn't know what to reach for. Then a pair of chopsticks crossed toward her. Braised pork, placed without comment. She looked at Ruyan. He was eating, eyes down. She patted his foot under the table. He told her she was eating too slowly. She told him she was already full. Pei tried to insist. No second bowl. Mrs. Liu pressed anyway. "Eat more," she said. "You look like the wind could take you." Pei declined gently and excused herself to the living room. Passing through the corridor, she slowed. There was someone in the hall, on hands and knees cleaning the floor. Pei's voice came out before she could think. "Anna." The woman looked up and laughed. The way someone laughs when the world has surprised them in a good way. Anna, who had worked at Pei's family home years ago, who had seen her grow up, who had quietly resigned one day and gone home without explanation. And now she was here, in the Liu family house, still working. Her husband had died, she explained. Her son had married. The countryside had become too quiet. The Liu family was hiring, so she came. There was no grief in the way she said it. The words were factual, a life described in order. Her husband had gotten sick. The money ran out. She had moved to the city to earn. The salary was good. She saved. But illness doesn't wait for savings. She went back to care for him. He didn't survive. She returned to work. That was how it went. Anna looked at Pei the same way she always had. Clear-eyed, unhurried. "Don't look so sad," she said. "You look better than ever. And this man you married, he's a good one." Then she said it plainly. "I always saw that the young miss liked you." Pei asked how she knew. Anna smiled. "When she watched you, she couldn't look away. And the moment you looked back at her, she looked somewhere else. If I hadn't been watching for it, I never would have caught it." Pei stood with that. She turned it over in her mind. Ryan had said it. Now Anna. Both of them. People who paid quiet attention to things that moved too fast to see. Did Ruyan really feel that way? Then why had she refused? Why those words? The ones that left marks? Pei thought, if someone loves you, they are gentle. Ruyan was never that. And yet, maybe everyone else could see something she had been standing too close to notice. She took her clothes to the bathroom and closed the door. But the door opened again before she could begin. He stood in the frame. She pulled her clothes against herself, caught completely off guard. He crossed the distance slowly. She tried to step back. The more she moved, the smaller the space became. He held her face. She reached for air. When he finally stepped back, she expected him to stay close. He didn't. "Good night," she said softly. She reached up and pressed her lips briefly to his forehead. Like smoke, and then gone. She slept deeply that night. When morning came, the light arrived through the curtains and fell across his face first. Her face beside it. His heart caught, the way it always did when it arrived before thought. She stirred, opened her eyes, found him already looking. Her hand was across his waist. Her face went red. She moved fast, untangled herself, reached for clothes, sat up. He watched from beneath the sheets. She turned her back. He got up too. The room was still, just the sound of fabric and footsteps. He stood on the carpet in the early light, and without meaning to, she looked at him. "Well?" he said, without turning. She looked away. She shook her head. When he put on his jacket and reached for his cufflinks, she noticed the watch, the one his father had given her. She took it off and handed it back. He looked at it in his palm for a long moment. "Keep it," he said quietly. Then he left for the set. Breakfast was finished, and the farewells were made. Ruyan drove her back to the crew. She hadn't asked. He had simply come. At the entrance, he stepped out and walked around to her side. She looked at him, confused. He gestured. "Come on. Aren't you going to work?" she asked. He looked at her and said, "I took the day off." Pei couldn't process it. As someone with 100 responsibilities at any given moment, he had taken a day off. For this. She followed him inside, and when people recognized who had just walked through the door, the entire crew rearranged itself. Every greeting he received was respectful, precise and brief. He answered each one with equal quiet. On set today, the female lead was a recognizable face, high numbers on every platform, a crowd already gathered outside. The scene being shot was confrontation, a breakup. Pei would play the woman who came seeking explanation, and found instead a room full of beautiful people and a man who had moved on. The scene required tears. It required restraint, the harder thing. Pei found both. Her voice stayed even until the last moment. "If you won't come to me," she said, "I came to you." The reply was cold and clear. "We're done. There's nothing left to say." Her character absorbed it, breathed through it, chose to leave without breaking. And from her left eye, a single tear. The director rushed forward. That was it. That was everything. The crew murmured approval. People turned to Lena, some with praise, some with something quieter and less comfortable. She received it all with a small, careful smile. Someone said Pei's career was about to crack open completely. Lena smiled again. Some people are just built like that. The scene wrapped, and then, without warning, the floor at the edge of the pool shifted beneath Ruyan's foot. She slipped. Pei saw it before anyone else registered what was happening. She moved before she thought. The water took Ruyan immediately. It was only 5 or 6 meters deep, but she didn't know how to swim. Pei went in after her. The water was cold and fast and full. She found her. She pulled. When they came up together, Ruyan coughed and shook and pressed close without knowing she'd done it. Pei lifted her out and set her on solid ground. Someone brought a coat. Pei wrapped it around her shoulders and held her against the cold. "Don't be frightened," Pei said. Ruyan didn't answer. She sat folded inside the coat, her head against Pei's chest, finding warmth the only way available. Pei held her tighter than necessary. A minute passed. Then she looked up at the director. Why wasn't the ground condition checked before shooting? The director apologized immediately. The staff behind him received the rest, a rare display of open anger, precise and cold. Ruyan said quietly, "Let it go." They didn't mean to. Pei exhaled, turned, told the crew to go. Lena approached after the others left. She looked at Ruyan and then at Pei. "You're both okay?" Pei nodded. Lena let out a breath and patted her own chest. "I was scared," she said honestly. "Good, that's good." Ruyan tried to stand. Pei moved to help, and Ruyan allowed it. They walked toward the dressing room together, and the set went quiet around them. While Ruyan changed, Pei went back to the pool. The staff was already cleaning, mops, vacuums, the surface being swept of what had just happened. She crouched down and touched the ground near where Ruyan had fallen. It was wet. That much was expected. But something about the texture was wrong. Too slick, too specific. Her face changed. This wasn't an accident. Someone had made the ground deliberately dangerous, near enough to the pool that a fall would be natural. By the time the crew cleaned it, there would be nothing left to find. Whoever had done this knew exactly where the cameras sat, and where they didn't. The staff watched her stand. No one spoke. They knew that expression. She asked for the surveillance room. She found it, sat, watched. One corner of the frame caught half a figure, a woman, moving carefully, knowing the blind spots. The image was degraded, vague, but the intent was clear. Pei sat with that knowledge and said nothing. Yet. When she returned, he was waiting. He'd noticed she'd been gone. She said she'd been walking. He gave her the look that meant he didn't believe her. She moved ahead. He caught up. "You thought I'd left?" He nodded slightly. She smiled, the light catching her face in the open air. She wanted to reach out and touch his head. She stopped herself. Some feelings require timing, and she knew. Even if there was something growing quietly between them, an old love had not yet left her heart. Not completely. Still, she turned to Ruyan. "Thank you. For today." He said there was nothing to thank. She disagreed. "You've saved me more times than you count," she told him. He was quiet. She leaned in, then maybe a practical gesture would help. Something real. He said nothing. She proposed dinner. "Too simple," he said. "A film. No interest." He considered for a long time. "Come with me somewhere," he said. "Somewhere you'll understand when we arrive." She agreed. And because of the morning's accident, the rest of the day's shoot was handled with triple the caution. Ruyan sat with a magazine in one hand and his phone in the other, watching, waiting. The scenes repeated until the director was certain. Then came a call Pei hadn't expected. A friend on the phone, voice urgent. "Get on social media. Now." The photos were already spreading. 3 items on the trending list, all of them about the pool. Someone had captured everything: the fall, the rescue, the aftermath. Ruyan drenched and pale, Pei pulling her from the water. Pei clicked into the first result. Her face changed. The images were clear, her own expression visible in every frame. Worry, urgency, the moment of relief. Ruyan's face partially obscured in some shots, but in one, fully visible. Jawline precise, hair still wet, eyes closed, extraordinarily composed, even in crisis. The comments were arriving in waves. "Who is this woman? The side profile alone, it's rare. And Pei is also handsome. They suit each other," someone wrote. Pei sat with that for a moment longer than she expected. She read through the thread carefully. No one had confirmed Ruyan's name. No identity revealed. Yet. The door opened. Ruyan walked out in just a towel. Pei looked at the ceiling. She spoke to the wall. "Someone photographed us today," she said. "It's trending." Ruyan took the phone. He looked at the image. Both of them, close, her arms still around him. In the photo, she looked small against Pei's frame. She was 168 centimeters. She looked smaller. Ruyan studied the photo for half a minute. Then he pressed the phone back into Pei's hands without a word, and lay down. Pei kept scrolling. The post had been read nearly 6 million times, 270,000 responses. She checked and rechecked until her eyes lost focus. Sleep arrived without her knowing. Ruyan finished drying his hair and came back to find Pei half collapsed on the bed. Screen still glowing, shoes still on. He took the phone, skimmed it, set it on the nightstand, removed her shoes, adjusted her into something comfortable. Then he stepped onto the balcony and made a call. Quiet voice, measured words, removed the posts, removed the photos, all of them. The response on the other end was immediate. By morning the thread was gone, and Pei woke to a friend's voice asking, "Who was that person with you?" "Just a friend," Pei said. "Who visits at that hour?" the friend pressed. She didn't explain. She never had to. Her friend always knew more than she let on. Pei protected Ruyan without announcing it. The decision came quietly. Discretion was simpler than exposure. She put down the phone and opened the app one more time. The thread was completely erased. She set down the phone. The pool, the photograph, the trending post. all of it dissolving, one by one. And a month passed. The month concluded with the final shoot. But 3 days before that, Ryan called. A reunion, a private club, an excuse that fooled no one. 7:30 in the evening. Pei arrived to find the familiar faces of an older time. Ryan, Anya, Marcus and Neil, all gathered in the low amber light of a private room. Neil sat slightly apart. He smiled when she arrived, but something underneath it wasn't fully present. Marcus raised a toast to Pei's new production, said it generously, "At this pace, you'll overtake me." Pei deflected. "I'm learning from you," she said. Marcus laughed. "When you surpass me, I'll celebrate with champagne." Then he mentioned Ruyan, and everything in the room shifted slightly. The moment passed, the door opened, Anya and Ruyan arrived together. The whole table lit up. Someone said, "Speak of him and he appears." Ruyan scanned the room, found Neil, and said, plainly without venom but with precision, "I see your fiancé still hasn't forgiven you." The air changed instantly. Neil's face went still. He looked at Ruyan and said quietly, "What do you mean by that?" Ruyan looked away. Silence from everyone else. Then, "I'll use the bathroom," said Neil, standing. Marcus followed. In the corridor, Marcus reached for words. He asked what happened. Neil stood with his back to the wall. The company's stock had been falling for months. Every new project arrived smaller than the last. His name, which had once been on every poster in every city, now triggered a nickname too accurate to argue with. Someone who had gone international and returned to nothing. He hadn't meant for those words to hurt anyone tonight. But the frustration had been sitting too long. Neil said softly, "Tell Pei I'm sorry." Marcus nodded. That he already knew. The two of them stood in the corridor a moment longer. Men who had once been certain of where they were going, now quietly renegotiating. They went back inside. The wine was being poured again. Anya had already lost count of how many glasses she'd had. She called Neil to the table with warm arms outstretched. But Ruyan was already moving. A proposition, a challenge, a game involving dice and wine and no announced rules. Neil recognized the target. He accepted anyway. 3 rounds, 4. Neil lost each one. His glass refilled without ceremony. Everyone at the table understood what was happening. Ruyan didn't lose at this. Not ever. The outcome had never been in question. Pei watched and worried. Neil couldn't drink the table dry. Then Ruyan stopped. He set down the dice. He looked at Marcus and said simply, "Take him home." Though Neil would never admit weakness, Marcus moved without hesitation. Pei helped them to the car. When she turned back toward the door, Marcus called her name. He said, "I'm sorry for what I said tonight. The words were quiet, particular, real." Pei accepted them and added, "You owe me one." Marcus drove away. Pei turned. Ruyan was standing alone near the entrance. Hands relaxed, cigarette unlit, watching the departing car with eyes that held more than they announced. "Where is Ryan?" Pei asked. Ruyan answered without moving. They stood there in the night air, the only two remaining. Something in the space between them felt different, like water just before it changes temperature. Inside, Ryan and Anya had reached the part of the evening where old debt is repaid loudly. Ryan told her she was always taking from him, never accounting for it, and Anya responded by denying everything while obviously remembering everything. The argument had the specific warmth of people who had long since stopped actually arguing. Ryan said, "You're a selfish wolf." Anya moved closer. "What did you just say?" Ryan was ready to demonstrate. And Pei, standing between them, watching them circle each other with amusement, didn't see the ladder at the edge of the room until her foot found the base of it. The room tilted. She reached for anything. Anya was closest. Her hand shot out, caught nothing. Pei fell forward, and then she didn't reach the floor. An arm caught her first. One clean motion, close and solid, and she was upright again. Ryan and Anya went immediately silent. Ruyan said nothing. He looked at them once. That was enough. Then he crouched beside Pei, removed her shoe, and pressed gently around her ankle. "Can you stand?" he asked. She didn't answer. He stood, turned and said, "Get on my back." She refused. He didn't wait. He lifted her. The argument was over before it started. Anya had already called the car before Ruyan could ask. On the drive, Anya turned from the passenger seat, full of apology. If she hadn't provoked Ryan, if Ryan hadn't responded, Pei wouldn't be hurting now. Pei said, "Next time just stay away from each other. I'm the one who walks between you." The doctor examined the ankle, prescribed medicine, said to take it twice daily and apply the ointment carefully. Pei thanked him. Who would help apply it? He looked around. The question answered itself. At home, Pei sat on the sofa with the ointment in her lap and said, "I'll do it myself." Ruyan asked, "Can you actually reach it?" She considered that. He crouched. The cold medicine hit skin and she pulled involuntarily. His hands slowed. "Hold on," he said. The cold spread and receded. She didn't know how long it took. When it was done, he brought her water and watched her swallow the medicine with a grimace. "Bitter," she said, pressing her lips together. He almost smiled. Then he asked, "Do you have anything scheduled soon?" She said she didn't think so. He said nothing further, but she remembered. He had promised to take her somewhere. The debt was still outstanding. She tried to ask about it daily after that. He consistently pretended not to hear. One morning, she knelt on the bed behind him and tied his hair back. It had grown long enough to need it, and asked one more time. He said, "Come help me with this first." The hotel appointment arrived without further announcement. Howay International Hotel, 58th floor. She arrived at the building and waited near the entrance. Something felt ceremonial about it. She couldn't say why. She turned toward the road. The car was still coming. The clock moved. She pressed the elevator button, and then the taxi in front of her didn't move. Traffic had stopped. Something had happened on the road ahead. She paid the driver and stepped out. She had 8 minutes. She could run it. She started forward, first a jog, then faster, pushing through the crowd that had gathered along the shoulder of the road. Her ankle ached. She didn't slow down. She stopped at the edge of what she found. A car, crumpled, barely recognizable. The impact had deformed the frame entirely. Glass scattered across the road. People stood around it, half trying to help, half unable to look away. Someone near her said the name first. She walked closer. The driver's side door had already been pulled open by the time she reached it. The face inside was white and still. Blood across the forehead, hair loose and tangled. She recognized him before she was close enough to be certain. Neil. She knelt. She lifted his head into her arms. She said his name, once, twice, quietly, then louder. No response. When the ambulance arrived, she didn't let go until they made her. She followed him to the hospital. His parents arrived. Marcus arrived. Her shirt was covered in blood that wasn't hers, and no one commented on it. The operating room doors closed. His mother wept into her hands. "My poor child, why is fate this cruel?" Marcus held it together for everyone else's sake and thanked Pei. She asked if her phone had any charge. It didn't. She found a charging cable at the nurse's station. The phone turned on. It was past midnight. She had missed the appointment entirely. On the other side of the city, Ruyan had waited. 20 minutes, 40 minutes, an hour. The waitress asked if he needed anything. "Water," he said. That was all. The restaurant around him stayed empty and elegant and perfectly set. 2 minutes past midnight, he asked for the check. In the kitchen, someone heard a sound, sharp, sudden, from the private room. The waitress knocked. No answer. She didn't open the door. When he finally emerged, his face was pale. His hand was cut. He settled the bill and walked out through the lobby alone. The hospital wall was the last thing Pei saw before Ryan's call came through. "Today is Ruyan's birthday," Ryan said. "Ruyan's birthday is the 16th. She looked at the phone. Past midnight. The date had already changed. She had been here, covered in someone else's blood, while across the city he had sat in a restaurant in the dark, waiting for someone who never came, and now it was the 17th.